ADHD is one of those things that so many people are, have ADHD, are dyslexic, and teaching is not geared toward people with ADHD. It bothers me. This is just my opinion, but it bothers me that it's called a person is neurodivergent. When in fact, I really think that there's no right way to teach. We shouldn't be teaching one way, and those who aren't within that are considered neurodivergent. Because I really think we're going to find more and more people that there's kind of several different ways of thinking, and that none is divergent. It's just thinking. And
Exactly.
you're so right that so many people become CEOs, become top leaders who are ADHD and dyslexic. And it's because you've had to learn different coping skills and how to get through things, and that becomes a superpower.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And everybody knows, oh yeah, we know Canada. And British Columbia on the west coast, right? Right. And we have a big city there called Vancouver. We are 500 miles north of Vancouver. And for our European friends watching us from around the world, about 800 kilometers. And it is winter here, and a beautiful area, lots of nature all around us, and lots of animals here, black bears, grizzlies, caribou, deer, you name it, we have them all here, living in harmony. Today we have a very interesting podcast, and the name of our guest is Dr. Deborah Heiser, and Deborah is a Ph.D. in applied development psychology, a TEDx speaker, a consultant, an author, and a founder of Mentor Projects, and an adjunct professor in psychology department of SUNY Old Westbury. That's quite a bio, Deborah. So it's going to be a very, very interesting podcast. So maybe share with our guests watching us from around the world your background, where are you from originally, what brought you through your education and hence to where you are today.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on your show. I'm originally from Iowa, which is in the middle of the United States,
Right.
and I now reside in New York. But what brought me to where I am in terms of my career um, was that I was not really sure what I wanted to do. And when I think about 19 or 20, I used to visit my grandmother in Florida all the time. There was a very cheap airline called People's Airline, and we were able to take those flights to visit her just for a weekend. So I would do that all the time. And one weekend I went to visit her, and she wasn't her usual self. My grandmother was the sort of person who I could take just shoes with me and wear her clothing and visit her and have a great time.
Right.
And on this occasion, she was not herself. She was disheveled, unhappy, grouchy, irritable. And I was really worried. I said, "What's wrong with grandma?"
Right.
And someone at the development where she lived said, "Don't worry, we're going to fix her." And she lived in like a gated community.
Right.
And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And they said, "Well, she's on a new medication and she's depressed." I didn't even know what that term was. I didn't know
Right.
what that meant. And they said, when you come back in about a month or two, she's going to be okay. And when I came back a couple months later, she was. In fact, she was so okay, she had a boyfriend named Wilbur. And so when I saw this, I said, "That's it. I'm going to go into the field of psychology. I want to fix grandmas all over the place."
Right.
So it started that way. I went on to get my PhD in psychology, and I was focusing on everything no one ever wants to have or get, including depression, frailty, all sorts of things, Alzheimer's disease. And then somebody came to me and said, what do we have to look forward to as we get older? And I didn't have an answer for that person. The person said, all you do is put a Band-Aid on everything we don't want. And I couldn't have agreed with him more. I just hadn't thought about it. So I went back and started looking at everything that we have to look forward to. What I found is that we all look at aging in an inverted V shape, so that we have a steep incline and then a slow, steady decline. And that scares us all, but that's what we think of aging. It's really not what it is. We have an emotional trajectory that starts at the same time and it goes up and never goes down. So even though I'm in my mid 50s and I need reading glasses, I always tell my students, you can outrun me, but I'm happier than you. You know, you all have the gift of being very agile at 20. But I don't mind that I can't outrun you. I wear reading glasses now. I'm slower, but I'm happier. And I started to look at all the other things that we had to look forward to along the way. And in midlife, we hit a stage called generativity where we want to give back to others without expecting anything in return. We've already amassed all kinds of expertise in the things that we have learned in life. And it's the way that we emotionally get to feel connected with the world, like we mattered, like we make a difference, that us being here meant something. So I decided to focus on mentorship, which is a form of generativity. Mentoring, volunteering, and philanthropy are all three forms of generativity. But mentoring, we're giving our own expertise, our own values, our traditions, our culture, our expertise in what we do for a living. All of those things are what make us up, and we give those back to others. So because there's a component of ourself that goes on into others, I wanted to focus on that. And that's really what led me to really embarking on forming the Mentor Project, and learning more about mentorship and how it's a bigger thing than the way that people most often talk about it in a very sort of frivolous way without putting much emphasis on the real development that is within us that really brings us to want to do this. It's not a simple transaction. There's a lot more to it. So that's really how I got to where I am now and how I'm looking at mentorship as a way that we can stop burning down all the libraries of information that each one of us holds, that when we don't mentor or give it back, it exits with us. So my goal is to really get more people connecting so that more people can involve themselves in transferring their information to somebody else and living on in a sort of way of immortality.
So is it kind of being content as who you are? For me, it took a long time to figure out who am I. And although I'm 84, I'm very contented. I'm happy. I'm giving back. I'm doing all the things that you suggest. And I agree with you that the curve goes up and then gradually downward from there. I'm not sure where the point is, although to a lot of people it falls in that last decade of life. It is expected from there on in things will likely go wrong, and gradually I can't do this anymore, I can't do that anymore. And we have then reconciled to that. It is what it is. Well, it isn't. It doesn't have to be. But one of the most important parts for me was that, again, from my background, I was born in 1940, November 1st, 1940. And so a couple of weeks ago, I turned 84. And I was born in Holland. And as you likely know, Holland, relatively small. I was born in the extreme northeastern point of Holland, a province called Groningen, within about 10 or 15 minutes from the German border. And my parents fell in love, got married in 1938, and my dad had a career. They rented a beautiful place. They were the happiest people in the world, and they quickly had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And then everything changed. Hitler decided first to invade Poland, obviously, and then from there on in decided to send the Blitzkrieg into Holland. My dad then was called into the Dutch army in April of 1940, and my mother was pregnant with me. And the last thing they heard from him was he was seen in Rotterdam just before they bombed it, and all of central Rotterdam, a huge city, was bombed and thousands of people died, and they did not know if he had survived or lived for 5 years. And
Wow.
so she was on her own during the war years, and everybody surrounding her had the same issues. So everybody was more or less on their own because everybody already had issues and problems. And then, the first thing that I remember is that the Allied forces landed in Normandy in the summer of 1944, and then the Canadian sector of the Allied forces pushed through France, Belgium, through the western side of Holland, and pushed the Germans back through the north. And in about February, March, April of 1945, through the north back into Germany. So I still remember from being a little boy, about 3.5, 4 years old, then 1943 and 44, that hundreds of planes in the air, bombers, bombing the German infrastructure that supported the war equipment. And my mother would take us outside in the evenings, not because to watch, but she felt safer outside than inside. And the sound of hundreds of planes is something that even now I will never forget. And in the distance, the sky used to be red from the cities that were burning right across the border from us, 10, 15 miles away. Bremen, Kiel, Hamburg, all those areas that touched onto the North Sea. And then the other part that I remember is the hunger summer when they cut off all the supply of food, and we, the kids, my brother, my sister, myself, every morning we would go with gunny sacks into the railroad yard, pick up anything edible and burnable. And that's and the reason that we did, because they wouldn't shoot us, but they boot us one, but we'd be back the following day. And then the next thing that made an impression on me is that it was April the 12th, 1945, when we were liberated by the Canadian Army, and it made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward, my dream was to go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I did finally when I was 23, and came to BC, and the second dream that I had is build a lumber mill, because my dad had been working in lumber and my grandfather was a master carpenter, and I started with nothing.
Wow.
Came to Vancouver, here, couldn't speak the language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. And academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3, and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said to my parents, he said, what are we going to do with them? And they said, well, send them to the mentally challenged school. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. So at 12, nearly 13, but I was 12 years old when I got a job working in a furniture factory to become a furniture maker. And then at nights I would go to the college and do courses in furniture making. And so lumber was always part of what I wanted to do, hence my dream to go to Canada was still very much there, and then to build my own lumber mill, because as you well know, that kids can be hard on each other. The friends that I had when I was in grade 7 went on to college and university, and I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then, I had challenges with it, like, who am I? Why am I different? And I was always optimistic and those things, but I was different. So I felt then I had to change and start over again. And so the reason of going to Canada was the land of my heroes, but even more importantly, it allowed me to start over again and start with nothing, and a dream to go here and then build a lumber mill and go to Western Canada, being British Columbia. And when I landed in Vancouver, went to the immigration department there, and fortunately there was a German fellow and I could speak some German. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. That's where they're building all the lumber mills, and that's where the opportunities are for you to build a career and own, eventually, your own mill. So that's what I did. I went in the bus to Prince George, as I already said earlier. It's about 500 miles north of Vancouver, 800 kilometers, took about 10 or 12 hours. And I can still, this is 60 years ago now, and I can still see the Greyhound station where it used to be here from our studio, about 2 or 3 blocks away from here. So when I came off the bus, I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I had my money. I counted every nickel of it at least 3 times. I had $25.47. But I had attitude. I've always had a positive attitude, and I've avoid negative, and I still do that today. Passion, whatever I do, I give it 150%. And then work ethic, I work harder than anybody, even still now at 84. I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. So today, yes, I did build a mill, and probably 10, 7 or 8, 9 different other companies, and but even then, Deborah, I still had challenges with who am I?
Yeah.
Everybody said, you're so successful. I didn't feel that way. And it took me until something happened that changed my life. And I went to a store here, bookstore, and I picked up a book, and that changed my life. And I still have that book here. And it was January of 1997. I wrote in it 1997. The title of the book is Driven to Distraction by Dr. Halliwell. Dr. Halliwell is ADHD and has dyslexia. He's a professor, a doctorate, has written at least 18 books, 5 on distraction. And I had never even heard of ADHD. And so I wrote in the book, this is the actual book, I wrote in it in Dutch. Now I know who I am. And it was January 1997. So he wrote this book in 1993. I picked it up in 1997 and then discovered I'm ADHD. So, but I had never even heard of it. And so I started checking it out and going to Google and all the other things. And the more I found out about it, the more I believe that it is a superpower. And
Yeah.
so and so it changed my life. But it's even then, I already was 57 years old when I picked up the book. And then it took me 5 years before I went to my doc that delivered two daughters, actually. And that was a personal friend of mine. And he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked out. Yes, I do. And so the more I found out about it, the more it started changing my life in a way as to who am I, and started to reconcile that the difference is that I now understand ADHD. The more I found out about it, the more it became obvious that more and more people than me have ADHD. And so the more I found out, initially I thought maybe 8% or so. And then the other interesting part about it, Deborah, was that you are my podcast number 360. And my podcast number 203, I did with Dr. Halliwell, that wrote
Wow.
the book. And so for anybody that would like to watch it, it's a very interesting podcast after all that time to have him on my podcast. And I suggested to him, he's the expert, not me, that I had concluded that it was a superpower. He agreed. And I said that I believe, at least in my mind, that more than or 20% of the population, male, female, likely ADHD. He said, "No, John, probably 25%, if not more." And then
Yeah.
the other thing that I suggested to him is that in all the time that I've been in business and being on different boards and being very, very interactive with successful people, entrepreneurs and business people, that I believed from my experience that probably 50% of the successful, and the operative is successful, entrepreneurs are ADHD. And he said, "No, John, probably 75%." And I agree with him. And so, but since that time, since I was 62, what is unique about it is that I was still 12 when I left grade 7 for the third time. And then 50 years later, going through all that period, already being successful in quite a number of areas, I discovered that I'm ADHD, and that challenged me, troubled me to a certain extent, and I'm still successful, but not reconciling it with myself as to who am I, and and so then I felt that I had to be more vocal about that. I do that now, and I started writing books, and I wrote a book actually on among 5 other ones that I'm doing on ADHD Unlocked, and I've if I look back at me, so from the time that I was 12, nearly 13, nearly 50 years later, I found I'd never even heard of ADHD. And so to the long answer is that getting to the point, who am I, to me was critically important. That purely circumstantial. I picked up the book, I started reading it, and started understanding it, and the dynamics around it changed my life. But and I feel if I can do the things that I do, and sharing it with others, either in writing books about it, or doing podcast or speaking engagement, as you do and as I do, then I don't do that only, but I usually include it in presentations that I do, and and it's not uncommon for me. I did one about 6 months ago, a couple hundred people or so, and I usually throw in a little piece about ADHD and kind of ask, who in the group has ADHD or believe they do, and number of hands go up. And by the time I'm finished with my presentation, I'm a very good presenter. I know that a lot of people are sitting there and saying, damn, I wish I had it too.
What you're talking about and saying, and even when you're talking about the developmental trajectory and how you were saying, it took me a while to figure out who you are. ADHD is one of those things that so many people are, have ADHD, are dyslexic, and teaching is not geared toward people with ADHD. It bothers me. This is just my opinion, but it bothers me that it's called a person is neurodivergent. When in fact, I really think that there's no right way to teach. We shouldn't be teaching one way, and those who aren't within that are considered neurodivergent. I really think we're going to find more and more people that there's kind of several different ways of thinking, and that none is divergent. It's just thinking. And
Exactly.
you're so right that so many people become CEOs, become top leaders who are ADHD and dyslexic. And it's because you've had to learn different coping skills and how to get through things. And that becomes a superpower. So if you're
Exactly.
just really good at book learning, you're not learning other ways of navigating. And you have to if you have ADHD and you're dyslexic. You have to learn how to do things if reading is difficult for you. It's not an intelligence thing.
No.
It's the learning thing, and school learning is very difficult in that way. So that is so important that you're really mentoring others when you're talking about that, when you're doing a podcast on this, when you're writing about that, because there are so many people that think there's something wrong with them, and there isn't. It's really, like you said, a superpower. Those who come out at the end after school age end up knowing how to navigate all the social aspects of life and see things through a different lens, and it makes them better leaders.
I agree 100%, Deborah, is that I was very good with numbers even then, and I was a very good writer, but not a reader. Even today, I'm not a good reader. And, and especially in being in business, my approach to doing business is different than other people's that have been trained to fit a certain box and that's how you operate. What I do is just the opposite. I know the box, I know what is in it, and I say, why not here, why not here, how about there, how about there? And so that makes some of the friends that I have in that field, I've been quite successful, and it makes them feel uncomfortable. But it's successful, and as you said earlier, it is not an, a liability; it's an asset. And my objective is to, by sharing my story, is that I've always have been, and in spite of it, have been successful, and that I believe that once you understand it, hopefully earlier in life, and so that then already your parents or you can start taking directions more suitable to the being ADHD, and that whole process, in my opinion, is now being questioned as well. Is that micro certification is likely a more appropriate direction to go? Is suggesting that too often we have to go to a schooling system to become specialist in a certain area, and where of the 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, I'm just using it as a for instance, is that if it takes a year or 6 months to learn that specialty and the other ones are additives, then structured in such a way that the specialty is developed and the additives can be still learned in addition to, but to create the interest of and the ability of the ADHD mind to give them this objective and this dynamic to become whatever I do, I'm very good at doing that have that passion and learning, and then make the other ones secondary to the main objective.
I think that those are all great points. I really agree. I think also, though, one thing that people didn't have and still don't to an adequate level is to have mentorship that can help guide. Because if a person knows that they're smart and that they can get different ways of learning things, come to the same conclusion others are, but in their own kind of way, they'll see that that's not them having a deficit. It's a real, it's, I think that a lot of it is if we have the ability to have people showing others that there is a path forward. And I think that right now we're at a really good critical point because we have AI, we have all of the video options, we now have podcasts. There are new ways that people are demanding to learn. They're saying, I'm not gonna learn everything from a book, from a written book. We now have audiobooks. We now have people who learn all sorts of things from YouTube and from other online platforms. And if we can harness that through individuals who are experts who can say, let me work with somebody one on one, and I can go to where they need to learn it. That's a different way of looking at it. Now, mentorship enters that as an extra level. And I think that nobody's ever had that in the past. ADHD was just seen as something that somebody has, and that we're going to put them in a corner and we're going to keep teaching in the mainstream way. But now there's so many options that we can change that narrative. Really think we can.
So I would suggest then and that from what I've learned so far, including my interview with Dr. Halliwell and reading his information, and there's more and more information available now online about
Yeah.
ADHD and issues relating to that, is that the probably between 25 and 30% of the population, male and female, are affected by ADHD. They may portray it differently as males and females, but are affected by it. And it's not a liability. And as you said earlier, mentorship, very, very important, and is being more recognized, not only for ADHD, but also for other areas that are not traditionally understood as well. And obviously that is one of your specialties in particular. So maybe talk about that a little bit more, like how do you help clients that approach you in terms of especially dealing with these issues, or organizations dealing with these issues?
Sure. I want to first say that I want to define, if I can, mentorship because I think and I can talk then about lateral mentoring because that's really where a lot of people who are adults can engage and learn. But the mentorship is not a transaction. And most people think of it as that. People say, I need to go find a mentor, and then I'm going to get information from this person. Then it's a nameless, faceless individual. And it doesn't hold value when we think of that. Meanwhile, that person is holding information that's critical to you, but we're not giving that person any space really. So, mentorship first starts with that developmental milestone of generativity, where we're built to want to give back to others. It's where we say, wow, I have all this information. That's what you're doing right now. You have a podcast, you've written books, you're giving back. There's a piece of you in all of that that's living on. And that's what we're all built to want to do. By the time we're about 50, we're really ready to do this. We have the bandwidth. Prior to that, we're figuring out who we are, and we're figuring out who our people are, and we're figuring out what we're really good at. So once we reach that stage, and this is a flexible stage in terms of years, we engage in that. And what we also need, though, is to have somebody who wants our information. So I could say, hey, I want to give out all sorts of information to people, and they may not want it. I have to find the right person who wants the information I'm giving. And so that's necessary. The second thing is it has to be um, uh, not with an extrinsic motivator. It has to be an intrinsic motivator. And what I mean by that is if you're being paid to mentor, you're not a mentor. You're doing something else good. Maybe you're an advisor, maybe you're a coach, maybe you're whatever you are, but you're not a mentor. Because a mentor is giving back something that they want to give without even any credit. They don't even need to be people to know they're doing it. So the example I like to give for that is that the person if I said to you, hey, would you like to go volunteer at a soup kitchen? You might say, yeah, sure, I'd like to. I would feel really good afterwards. Now, if I said to you, instead of doing that, go volunteer your time at Starbucks. Every student I've ever asked if they would do that says no. They feel like then they are being taken advantage of because everyone else is getting paid there. It's a different feeling. They wouldn't feel good giving out food and beverage to hungry, thirsty people at Starbucks, but they would at a soup kitchen. So the next thing is a meaningful connection. We all have people that we meet all the time. Some people are people that we say, that's somebody I want to continue being friends with or having a relationship. And there are other perfectly fine individuals that we say, you know what, that's not my person, but it's great. In mentorship, it is not a failure if somebody comes along and that's not a match and it's not your person. But you have to have the relationship be one where you both like each other and feel meaningfully connected.
Right.
There also has to be trust. If you're at work or if you're in some kind of a situation where you think that the person who's your mentor is going to think less of you when you tell them something about yourself, that isn't a good relationship. Likewise, if you're a mentor and you think the mentee is going to go steal your information and run off with it, that's also not good. You need to have trust in the relationship in both directions. And finally, there has to be a goal. If you're just hanging out, you're a friend, you're chit chatting. There has to be a goal. And that could be a one time only goal, or it could be a lifetime goal, or anything in between that. So, mentorship requires all of those ingredients and for it to be mentorship. And so when I think of mentorship and how it works and how we can get people connected is there's something called lateral mentoring. And that's where we look to the people to our left or to our right, anyone around us, and we can engage in mentoring with them where I have a different expertise than you have, and you have different expertise than I have. As you give your expertise to me, I'm now carrying that, and the wheel has continued forward. Most of us just slough this off as, oh, yeah, I just went about my daily business. But it's actually bigger than that. And if we can acknowledge every time we help someone um, and someone helps us, it makes us do it more and more. And it gives us that real health power of making us feel more emotionally secure and more fulfilled, more content when we're doing that. And so, mentorship, the way that I can see it in regular life, is really powerful when it's lateral. In terms of how the mentor project, where the organization that I run works, is that we're trying to make sure that every person who is has some really special mentoring talent is able to share that with someone, especially from a part of the world that they may never have access to someone with that talent. You know, how often does a student get to meet with an astronaut or with somebody who invented the firewall? You know, things like that. And that's where, you know, there's some real power in that, especially for the mentor, but also for the mentee. We're making the world a more connected place, and we're not allowing people to think of the world as one that's completely hierarchically academic, the way that we think of school. We're using it as a big playground of learning and sharing and information exchange. And that sort of changes that plane and I think levels the playing field for everybody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You also wrote a book about that, right? And
I did. It's called
maybe tell us about that.
Sure, it's called the Mentorship Edge. And what happened was I was really starting to see so many people misuse the word mentor
Right.
so that people are not engaging in it. It's seen as now a much more, oh yeah, sure, mentorship. Yeah, I'll go get some mentorship, and it's really not like that. The meaningful connection within it and the power of the mentor is removed from the whole equation. And you don't have mentorship without a mentor.
No,
It should not be seen as I'm going to go grab some information from somebody and go make myself have a better life now.
no.
So I really wanted to define it properly and show how we're built to do this. This isn't something that I think I'm now going to go get some mentorship. It's something we must do.
It's
We're
not a
burning down
commodity.
life.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. And
yeah,
so I wanted to also show what it is and what it isn't. It
right.
isn't coaching, it isn't advising, and how it's different from those, and also how easy it is to engage in it. We're doing it all the time, and to show examples of that. How Charlie Camarda, the astronaut, used lateral mentoring in space to get back safely. How you can be a student and lateral mentor with another student, and that you're probably doing this, you just don't know it. And how when we engage in mentorship, we can, it's like a high that we get when we know we've helped someone.
Yeah.
You remember it and you carry that within you all the way until the end of life. And so when we know that we can engage in it, in the book, I show how we can do this in work and home. It's we're already doing it, but the acknowledging part of it is so important. You can be a grandma and mentor. That some of the most important mentoring that we've had is through the culture exchange from one generation to the next. So religion has been passed down for centuries. That's mentorship. All of the holiday traditions that people have, where when they get together, they know what food they're going to eat, what the surroundings are going to look like. There's a smell people associate with holidays and traditions. That's mentorship. If somebody doesn't pass that on, it's lost, it's gone. But those are our most strong mentoring things that mean the most to us at the end of our life. We don't really care about the day-to-day work mentorship. We really care about the cultural mentorship and those meaningful connections that we made and knowing that we passed something on. And so there's a real power in some of the things that we engage in all the time, like traditions or values, the things that we say morally mean something to us. All of those things are very important in terms of mentoring, and they never really get talked about.
The interesting part about it, Deborah, is that there is a certain amount of satisfaction that one has if he understands she understands what mentoring really is, and then to have then the reward of knowing that it helped someone in their life, and somebody that likely will remember you, and it may well be mutual. And the interesting part now that I found about 5, 6 years ago, maybe 7, I started to interact blogging here, mainly regional and local, and then started to work with a television station and local one or regional one, if you wish, and then the COVID happened. We couldn't do that anymore. And say, what do we do now? Is saying, well, I have this apartment that I'm sitting in now. Maybe we should develop our own studio here And then, so we did that. And so I have two couches, as you can see. And usually I'm sitting there, my guest is sitting here. We did that for a while, and that worked. And then say I should do another one, because I'm running. We have lots of interesting people here. Maybe set up another studio in Vancouver. I have an apartment there as well. And then the more I'm watching television evolve as it does over the years, is seeing people being interviewed, 1, 2, 3, 4, from all around the world, is saying, well, maybe we try virtual. And so we started doing it. And then from there on in, as podcasting started to emerge, and we got involved in that about 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago maybe, and then signed up with an organization that does matching of guests from around the world. Podmatch does a very good job of that, and all of a sudden we podcasting now, like you and me are podcasting here. You're a podcaster, I'm a podcaster, and where you give presentations, I do presentations. Where I go, I still love doing live presentations, but maybe a couple hundred, 500, whatever number of people. But here, podcasting, we know already that as we podcast here, in our podcast, this podcast will be released this afternoon, and that we know that not only tens of thousands of people, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, because they are watching us having this conversation. And that, to me, is mentoring format that is amazing, because as you then develop podcasting around that, and I do quite a few podcasts, about 4 or 5 a week, and sometimes more, and be very active. I think we got 700,000 or so on subscribers on YouTube, and millions of other ones around the world where we are podcasting. You from Florida now, but this afternoon there may be somebody from Australia or somebody from Greece or Europe, and it's just only starting at this point. It's still expanding, and it's the new media, which is just, to me, amazing. And I love it.
You make a great point. We don't always know where we're reaching. You know that numbers are being reached, and you'll see those numbers. Here's how many viewers or how many likes. But I'll give you an example of how powerful it is, because, and I write about this in the book, The Mentorship Edge. There was Bob Lefkowitz. He was the chemistry Nobel Prize winner in, I think, 2012. And he was like, gee, how did I become a Nobel Prize winner? How did that happen? And he decided that he really wanted to look at mentoring, because he was mentored by people. So he decided to do something really unique. He made a legacy tree of all of his mentors that he could think of, and everybody who was at the same level as him, and the few mentees that he knew of. Just like we see for Ancestry.com, he made one of those, but it was all of his mentors instead of, all of his DNA relatives. And he mapped it out just like you would see that in an Ancestry.com, and he published it in a peer-reviewed journal. He went to a conference not long after it was published, and somebody came up to him and he said, hey, Bob, I'm 6 degrees Lefkowitz. And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, I read your article, and there are 5 people in between you and me who've worked on, under you. And so Bob said, well, what are you working on? And the guy started to tell him what he was working on, and it was Bob's words, and it was Bob's work that had been pushed out several degrees. And it was the most meaningful thing, other than the birth of his children, really, that mattered to him because he saw how far out he reached. Now, most of us don't make a legacy tree for ourselves, so we don't know how far we reach. But I can guarantee you, just like you were saying, this is a starting point and it's going to go out to whoever it goes to, and it could be millions. We don't usually see who we touch. But if we can know, if you know right now, hey, I am putting this podcast out and I know it's going to touch people, that can leave you with that fulfilled feeling that you want. That's what mentorship is all about. We now have
Exactly.
this modern form of mentoring, which is podcasting and YouTube and all of these other things that we didn't have when the definition of mentorship was created.
Amazing, Deborah. And as you say, it's still at the very beginning, and
Yeah.
and it will go forward from here. And I love it, So, so very very interesting. And so I want to ask you a few more questions about. Because an hour is far too short for us. We need to do this again in another 6 months or so. But so what comes to mind is, what can you look forward to as we age?
We can look forward to feeling happier, more fulfilled, more content. Most people think that that is a fallacy, but the research shows that we're happier as we get older. And part of the reason for that is that we start to see ourselves as relevant in the world, besides just being in our own sort of lane.
Yeah, and I like that, and I agree with that, and that's why it was fortunate for me to be able to share with you. It took me a long time to get there, but who am I is very, very important. The other one is, what is generativity?
That's what I had been talking about before, and it's a life stage. So, a life stage that most of us know all of the physical life stages, like walking and talking. Generativity is an emotional life stage, just like identity. You talked about that. That's a life stage. You should be going through the life stage of finding out who you are. Now, some people find it out earlier than others. There's a nice broad range, and you can shift in and out of these stages. But generativity comes when we really know who we are, and we already have some intimate relationships with people that we care about, and we really know what it is that we want to impart into the world. That's what generativity is. It hits in midlife, but I want to give an example to show how flexible this is. So, Ebenezer Scrooge from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, many people know that character. He was a guy who was self made, lived in a mansion, he had servants taking care of all of his needs, but he was miserable. On paper, he had everything everybody should want. But it wasn't until he engaged in generativity, where he started to give back and care for others without expecting something in return, that he found joy. That's exactly how it works. And he was past midlife when that happened. You could be 93 when this kicks in.
Yeah.
You could be 43. It's a flexible time period. So you find that you have not hit this stage yet, and you're saying, oh my goodness, I'm not where I should be. You can get there. It's not a problem.
Interesting. How do you get to so many top experts to mentor for free?
You know, everyone said to me, we started this organization, the Mentor Project, with 10 people. Bill
Yeah.
Cheswick, who's one of the fathers of the firewall, really wanted to get in front of students to teach them STEM before they became jaded. And he was retiring from Bell Labs. And he said, I'm moving to a farm. I'm not going to be around any students. And this is making me sad because I have so much to give. So we said, let's try to get Bill in front of some schools, school children, get him into some schools. And so about 10 of us, well, really 7 of us, started out where we were trying to do that, get him and ourselves to mentor kids.
Yeah.
And then from there, we went from 10. And people said, that's it. You're just, a bunch of weirdos going around, mentoring students. No one's going to want to do that. Then we went in 6 months to 60, then to 80, then to 100. And it's because people want to give back, but they don't know where or how. You can't go to a park and say, hey, kid, can I mentor you? That's not appropriate.
No.
So people need a place to find where they can be in an appropriate setting and give back how they want to. So we formed the Mentor Project, so it's mentor driven. It's not mentee driven. The mentor says, here's what I have to offer. And a mentee can come in and say, oh, I'd like what you're giving. And we set up a situation that makes it easy and safe to do that for both the mentor and the mentee. So people come to us and ask if they can mentor. And the top 1%, people think that they're so above mentoring. They're not. They want to mentor just like everybody else does. And they need to. It's such a loss to think that somebody is above giving back, but we're our most precious natural resource in the world. And they don't want to be wasted, just like none of us want to be wasted.
Exactly. So the mentoring that you do then in your structure is mainly virtual, not so much live, but virtual. And is it also based globally, or
Yeah,
yeah? So maybe tell us
it is
about.
global. Sure. It is global and it is in person and it's virtual. If you live in a far away from one of our mentors, you'll see the person virtually.
Right.
However, we do send mentors around the world. So Justin Thompson went to Tanzania to a small town called Sharati. He lives in California and he's a well-known artist. And he went there to teach them cartooning. He's the senior creative artist for Schultz Creative Studios, so Snoopy and all of those characters. And so he flew there and he taught not just the students, but he was teaching the teachers, and the whole community got to be involved because he made a giant mural on the whole entire side of the school. So, moms were carrying babies. Men were coming and helping him to set up, scaffolding, and everybody was involved in this. So we send people. He's now, right now, while we're talking, in Brooklyn, New York, with kids in Brooklyn doing the exact same thing. We send our mentors when we can to locations so that they can mentor. It requires funding, so that we do that when we can. But this past year, we've given away more than $3 million of mentorship hours to
Oh,
students in more than 5 countries. And some of that was virtual and some of that was in person, but we're really good at it. And our mentors are amazing with it. We'll be able to do more. It's a funding related thing that, we do what we can with the funds we have.
so a couple more things. If you got a copy of your book there, so we can take a look at the outside of the book.
I didn't bring one with me to
Okay.
Florida. I'm,
The-
I'm vacationing.
We'll find it online and we'll include it in the presentation. And then the other one is, how do you have how do we find your mentorship membership, and how do we get more information for our guests watching us from around the world that want to kind of get more information and maybe as a mentoree or mentorer?
Sure. If you would like to learn more, go to mentorproject.org. Mentorship is free for students globally. You just click a button and it says become a mentee. You can become a mentee and get connected with our mentors. So look through all of our mentors. If you want to get involved, support our organization. There's a donate button. That is how we get out to everyone. You can get involved in many different ways. So connect with us. There's a connect with us button if it's not a mentee that you want to become. That's one way. You'll be able to see all of our different mentors, though many of them are listed on there, and you'll be able to see some of the programs that we involve ourselves in. So definitely mentorproject.org. Check us out there.
Excellent. Deborah, it was an amazing podcast. We got a lot more to talk about. We want to stay in touch. And, and for all the people watching us, subscribe to both Deborah Heiser's podcast as well as mine. Subscribe to it, share it with others, comment to it, like it. That encourages us to do more of our podcasting all around the world. And Deborah, again, Dr. Deborah Heiser, Ph.D. It was a pleasure and very, very interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. This was a delight today. Time just flew.
Thanks, Deborah. We'll stay in touch.